Afternoon. Once again, let us start the session now. We have with us two resource persons, Professor Yashodat Alone and Professor Narendra Kumar. I request Professor Yashodat Alone, Professor, Department of Arts and Aesthetics, to the dais. I request Professor Narendra Kumar and the resource person from Jawaharlal Nehru University to the desk. He is a chairperson, Center for Political Studies. I request Sripat Ramudu from Central University, Political Science, to the desk. With a discussion for the session. I'll just briefly introduce Professor Yashodat Alone, who is a good friend of mine and a professor in visual studies of arts and aesthetics, Jawaharlal Nehru University. He has written several books on ancient Indian art, critique of Walter's paints, and Buddhist. He wrote on Buddhist caves, modern Indian art, neo-Buddhist visual culture. And he also wrote B.R. Ambedkar's critical framework. He is engaged in conceptual formulations of protected ignorance. This is being coined by Yashodat Alone, and his ideas of interest are ancient Indian art, Buddhist art, popular visual culture, caste studies, and interpretations, modern Indian art. These are the various, multifaceted subjects he worked on it. He has more than 16 years of teaching. In the beginning, he worked at Kurukshetra University and then moved on to JNU, Jawaharlal Nehru University of Teaching and Research Experience. He was nominated as the ICCR Chair, Visiting Professor in Shenzhen University of China, member of National International Experts Group. He has published more than 20 research articles in various reputed journals, research journals. Today he's going to talk about the interrogating mythic and cultural nationalism. Nationalism, which he perceives as defined in various ways in which deal more with the political and geographical identity of nation and nationhood. Colonial India witnessed varied developments at the same time. Certain democratic practices were also initiated, which paved way for the consolidation of the demand of self-rule. So Alone is going to talk about the self-rule, the notion of nationalism, and a unilateral projection of the tradition as a part of the divine, in quotes, and sacred, nurtured and strengthened the cultural nationalism, which we have been witnessing by the most of the the so-called political leaders of the time, and that gets invented through the mythic. So Ambedkar was the first to prevent the three dominant discursive practices evolved in colonial India. Mainly, we have been discussing about these aspects, and imperial, Brahmanical, and Marxist. So he's going to make a critique of the mythical traditions and the notion of nationalism. And this presentation also investigated such practices, academic as non-academic domains. So this is the topic of Alone's presentation. I request Professor Yashodat Alone going to talk on interrogating mythic and cultural nationalism. Thank you. You want to share?
Yeah, PPT.
Like you share. निकाल दे उसके ऊपर रख दे.
It has HDMI. 117.
Yeah, you did.
Yeah. Does it come? Yeah, and then let it remain here. One second. That's okay. I just yeah, PPT is coming. Yeah, I understand.
You want this?
Pen drive, I will run my PPT here.
You can share it.
I will share it. How will you share it? I 1 second. Share screen, entire screen. Yeah, this is PPT. This is PPT. Yeah. Yeah. Inside. Whatever. No. Why did you do it? Achha, okay, fine. So that the screen, full screen. Okay, fine. Well, thank you. Sorry for the technical glitches. I hope. Yeah. Is this okay on the Zoom? Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Thanks for an invite, and thanks. It's always a pleasure to be here in the city of Hyderabad, a great city, having many historical trajectories and also full of modernism, and a very active city. So it's always a pleasure to be here. So today what I'm going to speak is going to be very different and not a regular kind of a things which you have been listening. And it is more to do as to how we really understand certain interrogative practices vis-a-vis that of the reconstruction of the analysis as well as that of the cultural nationalism. So the colonial India witnessed growth of various disciplines and studies, including the study and reconstruction of the history. The historical trajectories are also traced to cultural, social, religious practices. The revivalism as a term and as a concept need to be interrogated from the conceptual formulation of protected ignorance. The idea of sacred and divine becomes normative that is full of presuppositions. It is interesting to understand as to how we critically analyze the ideas associated with tradition, cultural nationalism, and nation in particular. It may be observed that there are distinct discourses emerge while studying the Indic past. The critical framework of protected ignorance is to interrogate the knowledge production process. So I'll just give you a small example as to how you understand protected ignorance. Say, for example, a professor of physics gets up in the morning and pours water to sun. He does it despite knowing the fact that the water will never reach to sun. This is a fantastic example of protected. So likewise, you have to understand as to where your knowledge formation project is aimed at killing ignorances or maintaining those ignorances. And therefore, it is very necessary to interrogate the knowledge production process through the rational means. How do we understand this rational means? No doubt, as the philosophers have said, that rationality is relative. Yes, I accept that argument that the rationality is always relative, but its relativeness depends on its objective. If the objective of the rationality is to ward off ignorances, it becomes a righteous rationality. And if the objective of the rationality is not to ward off ignorances, it becomes unrighteous rationality, and consequently, it becomes protected ignorance. So I hope I'm clear. Protected ignorance is a day-to-day phenomenon that is seen in every sphere, including in the creative realms of visuality, cultural production of the day-to-day practices. Perceptual understandings of visual signifiers being socially and politically located are gauges of protected ignorance. Expressive urges are manifested through language, where language need not mean only an accepted notion of language, but may encompass all possible expressive means and capacities. Such capacities are expressed by the body of signifiers that are culturally constructed. The mythic and ideas of sacred and divine are part of protected ignorance. The four distinct discourses that were produced in colonial India was imperial discourses, Brahmanical discourses, Marxist discourses, and the non-Brahmanic discourses. Dr. Ambedkar was, and there is a history to this. I don't want to go into this history because it will take a lot of time and it will become altogether a different lecture. Dr. Ambedkar was the first one to present the critique of the three dominant discourses, mainly the imperial discourses, the Brahmanical discourses, and the Marxian discourses. And he was the only person in 20th century India who produced the critique of these three dominant discourses, and choose to take non-Brahmanic position by making the theory of Pratita Samutpad as cardinal theoretical principles. So you can read right from Annihilation of Caste to Buddha and Karl Marx. One can see how he used this particular Buddhist logic. The critique of cultural nationalism is first critiqued by Dr. Ambedkar and went on to dismantle the idea of homogeneity of tradition. I quote from Dr. Ambedkar's Annihilation of Caste: rules are practical, they are habitual ways of doing things according to prescription, but principles are intellectual, they are useful methods of judging things. Rules seek to tell an agent just what course of action to pursue. Principles do not prescribe a specific course of action. And this is an Annihilation of Caste. So this critical framework of rules and principles is important to unpack the phenomenon to understand the cultural nationalism. The aspect of divine, sacred as part of presuppositions operate as part of principle that produce distinct signifiers in the cultural domain through advocating the rules and principles, understanding the mind consciousness. I'm sorry. This system is also too domain through advocating the rules and understanding of the mind consciousness. Dr. Ambedkar, while responding to the civic address at Ripon Building, Chennai on 23rd September 1944, he says, I am no opponent to nationalism, Swaraj, or independence. If I could be assured of that independence, education and welfare is promised to the nation. He further adds that I will certainly fight for nationalism and independence. But if all this long talk and tall philosophy is followed by nothing else, and that nothing else is all about making a bond of social, that is, which is very paramount in order to create an idea of shared aspiration. And this is what exactly he analyzes in Thoughts on Pakistan. It is equally interesting to observe that Dr. Ambedkar made it very categorical in the same address that if it is confined to the governing class and political power is used to strengthen that community and disfranchise the rights of them. This is very important. Like how the hegemonic ideas even gets propagated through the idea of franchisee, and therefore the adult franchisee all becomes very important in one stroke while making the constitution. On 26 January, he says, this is 1949 in Constituent Assembly. On 26 January 1950, we are going to enter into a life of contradictions. In politics, we will have equality, and in social and economic life, we will have inequality. In politics, we will be recognizing the principle of one man, one vote, and one vote, one value. In our social and economic life, we shall, by reason of our social and economic structure, continue to deny the principle of one man, one man. The contradictions pointed out by Dr. Ambedkar are yet to be resolved. However, such contradictions are easily bypassed by the cultural signifiers. The cultural signifiers are driven by the presuppositions that are irrational in nature and aimed at establishment of homogeneity of tradition. As and when the ideas of any critical studies are evoked, these days this has become a sort of a currency that you have to do very critical studies, are evoked, it becomes pertinent to unfold the nature of criticality and its application through the theoretical position. People talk about criticality without defining their theoretical position and their theoretical principles. So this becomes, or a philosophical position. This becomes very problematic when you use the rubric, the so-called criticality. How can Indians, or for that matter, our entire knowledge formation process can be critical without defining the philosophical position? Because large amount of knowledge production centers around Vedantic logic, the practices of Vedantic is being made, and therefore it becomes problematic, and therefore to be critical becomes a dubious claim. Critical needs to be grounded in conceptual formulations in order to interrogate and displace hegemonic reconstruction of the past. To be critical is also dismantling presuppositions. To be critical means dismantling normative. To be critical means to create an enabling process. And one has to judge how much anybody is critical in India on these three important basic premises. Dr. Ambedkar constantly maintains the idea of social while constructing nation and nationalism. He presented a critique of French Revolution and Russian Revolution. He says that the French Revolution was all about liberty, bypassing the equality, whereas Russian Revolution was all for equality, bypassing liberty. And he says that both are not possible without having fraternity, and that fraternity is all about Maitri, and that is what he explains in riddle number 22. What sustains equality and liberty is fellow feeling. What the French Revolution is called fraternity. The word fraternity is not an adequate expression. The proper term is what the Buddha called Maitri. Without fraternity, liberty would destroy equality, and equality would destroy liberty. If in democracy, liberty does not destroy equality and equality does not destroy liberty, it is because at the basis of both, there is fraternity. Fraternity is therefore the root of democracy. Dr. Ambedkar writes in Thoughts on Pakistan, and he makes these quotations of Bhai Paramananda, what he says, that in history, the Hindus revere the memory of Prithviraj Singh, then Maharana Pratap, Shivaji, and Bairagi Bir, who fought for the honor and freedom of this land against the Muslims. While the Mohammedans look upon the invaders of India like Muhammad bin Qasim and rulers like Aurangzeb as their national heroes. And then he further says that there is a difference between nationality and nationalism. They are two different psychological states of the human mind. Nationality means consciousness of kind, awareness of existence of that tie of kinship. The feeling of nationality may be present, and yet the feeling of nationalism may be quite absent. That is to say, nationality does not, in all cases, produce nationalism. Now, this is an interesting oleograph, and I have picked up this example from the popular visual culture. And this was made in 1930. So you have Gandhi, you have Buddha, you have Jesus Christ, and then there is an image of so-called Bharat Mata. Now, very interesting. Bharat Mata has a very different trajectory of development, this particular image of Bharat Mata. It comes from Abanindranath Tagore's Bang Mata. So the Bang Mata gets converted into Bharat Mata. Very, very interesting development we find. The reconstruction of the nation and its figures of national heroes is an interesting pointer to understand the reconstruction of the nation in the framework of Brahminical cultural nationalism. The image also defies the construction of nation as offered by V.D. Savarkar. The collage of images have political pointers to understand the construction of nation in the notion of cultural realm that is inspired by the personas as projected in the public sphere, even even present day time. Now we come to this very important person like Swami Vivekananda, Tagore, Gandhi, Amartya Ghosh, Sarvapalli Radhakrishnan, and there is one more person which I have not put, that is V.D. Savarkar. Savarkar remains little different from these people, so that is why I have not put him in this kind of category. What are the common factors in all of them? All are Vedantic. They believe in divinity, believe in soul and purification of soul, idealize life, and offer individual persuasions as important means of liberation. They advocated detachments, discussed dualism of the human consciousness. Mysticism and metaphysics of dualism are the only means of understanding and formation of the consciousness as well as that of understanding. For all, Varnashrama Dharma is something like a divine. There is no critique of social liberation. Cause is a factor that happens as a natural phenomenon and cosmic phenomenon. All were part of revivalist ideology. And that is how the whole idea of Hindu nationalism gets advocated. Tagore remained little different and established educational institution in early 20th century at Shantiniketan as he was inspired by the universities in Europe. None could think of equality perversions as perpetuated by the religious practices. None explained cause for violence or psychosis. Their political advocacy was confined to Gandhian Swaraj. Radhakrishnan was a fantastic example of plagiarism, which Gaji has already mentioned. Radhakrishnan was critiqued by Dr. Ambedkar and Rahul Sanskritayan in his philosophical conceptions, as well as defending the caste and the cultural practices. The other important person that requires to be made position among those thinkers of Vedism was Dayananda Saraswati. They all have been responsible in advocating the Hindu cultural nationalism. Now I come to a film clip that is Jagruti's, and can please help me in playing this clip and putting it in Zoom. Yeah, this video. To stop sharing. Where is that clip? It's in the download. Share. Just do share. And now play. Yeah. There's no sound. Without sound, it won't have any sense. fantastic shot of WJ engine. Well, I come out of this and go back to my slides. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's full screen. Yeah, it's okay. How his nation's history is constructed in lyric is a significant example of constructing the poetic metaphors that have emerged out of religious understanding of the nation. The music of a song is composed by using effectively the military drum beats that became familiar with the audience. Its rhythm is very military based march past drum beats, and the opening sentence says, आओ बच्चों तुम्हें सिखाए झांकी हिंदुस्तान की, इस मिट्टी को तिलक करोगे, धरती है बलिदान की, वंदे मातरम वंदे मातरम. Visual opens with long train shots with steam engine using curved rail to shoot the train. The cinematic language becomes absolute delight with the military drum beats. Stanzas of the songs are interesting composition. The first stanza goes into geography of India, starting from Himalaya to Indian Ocean, and then shift to river Jamuna, that is Yamuna, and Ganga, where its banks with images of temples are conspicuously chosen as representation of the nation. It refers to the timeless history, and in the subsequent stanza, there is a considerable shift to medieval India, where Rajasthan is referred as land of great sacrifice. There is eulogization of the feudal lords of Rajasthan as great patriots of nation, where idea of the nation was located in the multiple areas controlled by the respective lords. Interestingly, Maharana Pratap's image is used on the screen to convey the message of sacrifice for the nation. Song further moves on to region of Maratha, where Shivaji is invoked as a person who fought with Mughals. The lyric says, बोली हर हर महादेव की, बच्चा बच्चा बोला था, शेर शिवाजी ने रखी थी लाज हमारे शान. These two examples are drawn from the medieval history of India, and both figures are projected as anti-Muslim heroes. Evoking medieval figures as that of pride of present-day nation, has been part of Brahmanical cultural nationalism. King Shivaji was never an anti-Muslim king. Lyrist Pradeep, who was from Indore and a learned Brahmin, consciously elected to represent these two examples as great nationalists who fought with Mughals, thus making it amply clear that the medieval Mughal rulers did not become part of the cultural heritage of nation, and instead memories of recollections are ingrained in the communal hate and religious divide of nation, that is Hindu versus Mughal. Then you have another example of how the nation is constructed in the popular oleograph. And one can see the so-called religious saints who hardly have any contribution in the making of nation. But they are become heroes are the project of nationalism. And then this is another example. You can see how the practices are being practiced even nowadays and what thinking goes. So here is a fantastic example of the earth getting cooled because there is an environmental problem, global warming, and how the Indians are approaching to this global warming. So सूरज से गर्म हुई पृथ्वी को ठंडा करते भारतीय वैज्ञानिक. Yeah, Vaidyanik is Marathi basically. So I'm from Maharashtra. So it's difficult for me to pronounce Vaidyanik all the time because I'm so much trained to pronounce as Vaidyanik. Anyway, so these are then there are a number of such examples. I have a lot of those examples of images, but what is important is how the logic of cultural nationalism has perpetuated in the consciousness of the Indians in order to think and practice all kinds of irrationalities. And here we have a myth as a historical reality. So Aryan concept is a myth which is considered to be historical reality. Then there are invasion theories, Aryan invasion theories. Then Mahakavya as a historical narrative. Then Valmiki, the author of Ramayana, who has been given appellation of untouchable despite the author of the Ramayana claims to be the 10th son of the Pracheta, who was a Brahmana. In another section, it is also mentioned that Valmiki was son of Pracheta, sage. It shows the author was not from Shudra Varna, but the 20th century systematically made the author to be untouchable. Similarly, Sudarshan. Who is Sudarshan? We don't know. Mahabharata and the textual tradition has a lot of Sudarshans. They claim that Sudarshan Samaj, that Sudarshan, the sage Sudarshan is traced in Mahabharata. The Mahabharata Sudarshan has the Sudarshan sage which is mentioned in Mahabharata has nothing to do with the Shudra Varna at all. But the appellation of Sudarshan Samaj is given to the Safai community. Those communities were involved in the manual scavenging. So this is an irony. And we call ourselves as great nation, as we are great nationalists. We should be ashamed of our own practices, as simple as this. And Bezwada Wilson, right? Bezwada Wilson, who is from Andhra Pradesh, has launched this nationwide agitation. And still the case is being fought in the Supreme Court. But none of the so-called great nationalists have really come forward in support of such things. So you have to question those attitudes, those conceptions. Thus, the nation is constructed through unilinear projection of hegemonic practices. The three important key achievements which India has made these days, and I say it in many of my lectures, that India is a fantastic labor supply country. We supply labor to all over the world, right from PhD, doctor, scientist, NASA scientist and everything, till the Safai Karmachari, including the farm labor and everything, everywhere in the country, everywhere in the globe. We are the fantastic labor supply country. The second achievement we have, we are a fantastic example of culture of mythic, mithyavadi Sanskriti. That we have produced a mithyavadi Sanskriti, that is a culture of mythic. And the third thing is Vidambanavadi Sanskriti or Vidambanavadi Sanskriti, that culture of defamation. You torment anyone, you defame anyone, you torment the body of a woman. You just say she is a kulta. You just say that she is bachalan. You just say that she is this, she is that. You just pick up a person and torment his life, dismantle him, defame him, and reduce to inhumanness, and you practice these kind of inhumanities. So these are all the psychotic perversions. So the culture of defamation is all about psychotic perversions that are being practiced in everyday life of the Indians. And these are the kind of things that goes in making of the present day cultural nationalism. And therefore, this cultural nationalism has to be critiqued and interrogated through by tracing the historical trajectory of the development as well as that of the kind of a thinking we have. I'm open to, so thanks. This is all. I'm just abruptly ending. I know it is an abrupt end to my presentation, but because of the paucity of the time, I'm ending here. Thank you very much.
only by widening the voting rights to a large section of the society, but also making it more and more representative from the perspective of citizens on the margins so that they could also positively realize presence of government. Later, he contributed significantly on democracy, its characteristics, its reference to various groups and their rights. One of the most important concerns for him had been conditions for the success of democracy in general and in Indian context in particular. For this, his two contributions are of major importance. First, conditions precedent for the successful working of democracy, 1952, and second one, prospects of democracy in India in 1956. Here, this paper tries to understand his idea of democracy and the future challenges that he envisaged in Indian context and analyze how his apprehensions remain significant contributions, especially in the light of lack of such expressed vision among the nationalist leaders of his times. The kind of writings he produced from 1919 to 1956 provide significant evidence in this regard, and probably rightly so, as coming from the ex-untouchable community, made him more worried for the successful functioning of democracy than his contemporaries. As stakes for its success, that is democracy, were more and much more higher for him than for anyone else. These two writings are of paramount importance for understanding his idea of democracy because those talk of both prospects and challenges that lied in the way of successful democracy for countries like India, which were starting their journey in democracy. It was more so there being a major challenge to maintain a balance between democratic institutions and existent regressive social structure. Daniel Chariot, 2009, in his paper, Does Democracy Work in Deeply Divided Societies?, argues that much has to be done to establish right institutions before full democracy can work. Establishing tolerant, lawful, functioning democracies requires patience, generations of hard work, and willingness to accept every incomplete and different versions of democracy for a long preparatory period. In another work, Michael Seward, 1998, tried to look at the different connotations given to democracy and starts by asking the questions like, I quote, if some democracies are more democratic than others, what makes them so? In the face of calls for more democracy, what exactly should we seek more of? These are difficult and contentious questions, not least because democracy is often used as of rhetoric rather than of definite substance, unquote. Ambedkar's contribution to democracy vis-a-vis conditions for successful working needs to be understood at two levels. One, at the general level, where his thesis is applicable to modern democracies, and two, at specific level in a caste-ridden society like India. There have been several forms of democracy, and Ambedkar does refer to that. In fact, having read text on democracy and the historical evolution of it, Ambedkar argued that there are various forms of democracy starting from Athenian democracy to modern democracy. Though there were 50% of the slaves among the residents of state having no citizenship rights and thus having no place in the affairs of the government, but still the Athenian system was called a democracy by the Greeks. This was contrary to the modern form of democracy. Not only form of democracy may differ in different countries, but within a particular country, there can be different forms over a period of time. Here, he cites the example of England, where pre-1688 and the revolution of 1688, known as Glorious Revolution, and first reform bill of 1832 had different shades of democracy within our country, showing the changing nature of democracy. He argued that not only there is a the change in the form of democracy, but its goal and objectives also keep transforming. If in England, initially the purpose of democracy was to restrict the king from using powers arbitrarily, then the purpose of modern democracy has changed to bring about the welfare of the states. Thus, from democracy shifted its ruler-centric approach to people-centric approach. Referring to Walter Bagehot, definition of democracy as a government by discussion, to Abraham Lincoln's popular words, government of the people, by the people, and for the people, Ambedkar defined democracy in his own words as, I quote, a form and method of government whereby revolutionary changes in the economic and social life of the people are brought without bloodshed, unquote. Thus, Ambedkar looked at democracy with a much larger purpose, wherein those who represent the masses attempt to bring fundamental changes not only in the political sphere, but also in their social economic lives without resorting to violence. As the people of different shades and status accept those changes. He might have referred to absence of bloodshed despite fundamental changes, as basic transformation in the economic sphere was preceded by bloodshed in the countries where communism was introduced in the first half of 20th century. He opined that this is not only the test of people, but also the test of the democracy itself to bring such radical changes without mayhem. One needs to differentiate between simple working of democracy and successful working of democracy. Democracy may be introduced in various countries in various conditions, and it may continue to exist despite the known existence of signifiers that make democracy successful. And probably that is why the Western scholars in 1950s and 1960s were apprehensive about the continuation of democracy in the countries like India, where the critical differences were marked by not just class, but also by caste, religion, region, ethnicity, etc. This paper tries to look at the working of Indian democracy from that perspective. The continuation of democracy must be applauded, but we have to look whether the democracy is more procedural or also substantive in nature after 70 years of its existence. Procedural refers to political equality in terms of free and fair elections, existence of institutional apparatus, legislative assemblies, and constitutional governments, etc. And substantive refers to socio-economic equality of citizens, tolerance for different opinions, institutional accountability, respect for the rules, strong political engagement of the democratic actors. And it is here that Ambedkar's conditions for the successful functioning of democracy become crucial. Ambedkar outlined these conditions in terms of 7 major conditions that he proposed. 1, absence of glaring inequalities in the society. 2, existence of opposition. 3rd, equality in law and administration. 4th, observance of constitutional morality. 5th, no tyranny of majority. And 6th, functioning of moral order in society. And finally, prevalence of public conscience. Inequality has been part and parcel of human society. However, emergence of private property has been termed responsible for introduction of formal inequalities among them. With the passage of time, these inequalities have been on the rise, and historical materialism of Karl Marx tells how the inequalities rise with each stage until socialism comes in. And probably referring to such inequalities, Ambedkar talked about absence of glaring inequalities in the society for functioning of successful democracy. Elaborating about glaring inequalities, he argued there must not be two classes with deep cleavages in the society, wherein one is suppressed, oppressed, carrying all the burden, and the other dominant one having all the privileges. If it exists, then he argued that there are germs of bloody revolution, which might not be possible to be cured by democracy, and called it a house divided against itself. Further, he wrote, I quote, that if the privileged few will not willingly and voluntarily surrender their privileges, then the distance between them and the lower orders will destroy democracy. Unquote. This was the case also due to the small number of privileged and a large number of those in the lower orders, as the voting value in democracy is same for all. And those who have large numbers form majority and may not tolerate these deep differences for long. Nonetheless, Ambedkar defends parliamentary democracy and wants to use democracy as a means for promoting national unity and social homogeneity. Independence opened a new chapter, and he was prepared to try once again to bridge the gap between caste groups of building a unified political body. And why this detour? A more egalitarian society. This is the deep meaning of the speech he made in the Constituent Assembly on 9 December 1946. He said, I know today we are divided politically, socially, economically. We are a group of warring camps, and I may go even to the extent of confessing that I probably am one of the leaders of such a camp. But, sir, with all this, I am quite convinced that given time and circumstances, nothing in the world will prevent this country from becoming one. With all our caste and creeds, I have not the slightest hesitation that we shall in some form be a united people. I have no hesitation in saying that notwithstanding the agitation of Muslim League for the partition of India, someday enough light would dawn upon the Muslims themselves, and they too will begin to think that a united India is better even for them, unquote. So you see that 1946, he's talking about how the possibility of, there was a possibility in the democracy for the Muslims also to have their own separate, not separate, but a kind of their own identity being recognized. The second condition, that is the presence of opposition, is related with the presence of opposition in the success of the democracy. Ambedkar tried to understand the role of opposition from the conception of veto power in democracy. He attributed a bigger meaning to veto operating at two levels. One, at the level of the people, and second, at the level of the political parties. In monarchy, the ruler rules for whole of his life, but in democracy for a stipulated period of time. The people will have the veto power only after the stipulated time, that is after 4 or 5 years. The ruler or the party in power would go to electorate after every 5 and giving the option to re-elect, reject the party or persons in power. But while in power for 5 years, who would be having a check on the authority of the government? And it is here that the role of opposition becomes significant in democracy, was the firm opinion of Ambedkar. However, when we look at actually in Indian case, initially for decades, there was no substantial opposition due to the dominance of the Congress party. That has been termed as Congress system by Rajni Kothari. And it was much later only that the government recognized the leader of the opposition status for the largest party in the House. But one wonders the role of opposition in our times, where regime in power has not recognized leader of the opposition due to technical reasons, and probably it is here that we need to understand the absence of the adoption of democratic spirit among Indian political parties. The third condition has been proposed in terms of equality before law and administration. I will not go into it, but I will get straight away to the fourth condition. That is, the fourth condition is in terms of constitutional morality. Actually, Ambedkar considered presence of constitution only a skeleton and its flesh that would make it a living and viable entity was the observation of constitutional morality. He cited the example of first president of George Washington in United States of America, who bluntly refused to offer his candidature after his second term. And for even the second term, he was reluctant and argued with those persuading him by saying, even if your loyalty and fidelity to me compels you to plead that I, as one who initiated that principle, we should not have hereditary authority, must not fall prey to your emotion. It exemplifies the prevalence of constitutional morality, where law may not have its written existence, but at the helm, those at the helm of affairs understand and respect the spirit of law and the observance of constitutional morality and work accordingly. Similarly, he cited the instances from British conventions which function as law, though not written, but those understanding the spirit of democracy abide by the constitutional morality against the temptation to do wrong, because they know that they would damage the constitution and damage the democracy as well. However, in India, going by the experience of the constitution, there have been several instances of lack of observance of constitutional morality by the persons holding high positions. For example, the role of governors in the states and their loyalty to the central government. The role of state speakers while deciding the cases of anti-defection against the incumbent regime. The role of President of India in some cases, though most of the times this office observed constitutional morality. Appointment of Chief Justices of India by the regimes in power, judiciary's favor to those appointing them, etc. The next condition was the tyranny of the majority. And this tyranny of the majority is something actually that needs to be understood when we look at the present context. Democracy being a majority rule will always have the concerns and challenges for protecting minority. And mind you, Ambedkar used to say that the Dalits or the sections which are less in numbers, they are also the minorities. Democracy being a majority rule will always have the concerns and challenges for protecting minority. India has got a substantial chunk of minorities, and so their representatives remain in minority. He emphatically told the minority must always feel safe that although the majority is carrying on the government, the minority is not being hurt or the minority is not being hit below the belt. He took instances from the House of Commons where Conservatives, despite being in big majority, would never deny them their due right to speak or bringing motions of any kind they liked. On the other hand, in Indian Parliament, he found hardly any motion to have been admitted from opposition that was in minority. He warned that despite a higher qualifier to bring a motion on the floor of the House, the voices of smaller groups or minorities should not be ignored and be allowed to ventilate their grievances. In due course, what might happen is that these minorities develop a contempt for parliamentary democracy and also develop revolutionary spirit, which is unconstitutional. It is therefore necessary that in democracy, the majority on which it is based must not act in a tyrannical manner. Coming to the moral order. In fact, we have been talking about the civil society. Actually, Dr. Ambedkar was concerned about this, and he, for him, a functioning of a moral order in society was another condition that was necessary for the success of democracy. He pointed out that political scientists have not been seriously concerned with this aspect, and thus ethics has been divorced from politics. However, he found that Harold Laski, the 20th century acclaimed political scientist of England, categorically mentioned that the moral order is always taken for granted in democracy. It is more so in democracy because there is a free government. That largely means that in vast aspects of social life, people are left free to carry on without interference of law. Or if law has to be made, then the lawmaker expects that the society will have enough morality in it to make the law a success. Thus, there exists a gap between those who expect and from those expected, revealing the fissure between politics and ethics. And probably Ambedkar was indicating towards filling this gap and make the democracy a success. The related condition that Ambedkar refers to is public conscience. Both moral order and public conscience are the virtues for whole of society to imbibe. No society is without injustice, and it spreads unevenly both in terms of time, space, groups or individuals, wherein few might feel its impact very small and few others very great, and some may be absolutely crushed under the burden of injustice. And in these conditions, the prevalence and observance of public conscience becomes very important. What is public conscience? He defined, I quote, public conscience means conscience which becomes agitated at every wrong, no matter who is the sufferer. And it means that everybody, whether he suffers that particular wrong or no, it is prepared to join him in order to get him relieved, unquote. He elaborated two incidents, one of the Jews and the other of the Indians in South Africa. In the former, under old Christianity law, Jews were not allowed to inherit the property of dead relatives. And it used to go to the king in England. It was at his mercy to give a part of it to the next of the dead. However, at a particular juncture of history, the king helped the Jews by revoking the law, and Jews got the inheritance rights. The point to be highlighted is that English Christians' conscience did not rise and agitated against such practices to help the Jews, but the king's initiative. In another case, for Indians in South Africa, who were suffering segregation, a large number of young boys and girls belonging to the white race joined the struggle of the Indians, which Ambedkar terms agitation of common people and rise of public conscience. At the same time, he questioned the public conscience that was not being raised by Indians in India, where there was a South Africa in every village on count of segregation of touchables and untouchables. He asserted, if no help is extended to the minority, which is suffering from injustice, gets no help from others for the purpose of getting rid of injustice, it again develops a revolutionary mentality which puts democracy into danger. There are many instances of non-observance of public conscience in India. The struggle going on in the tribal areas of for their livelihood protection, the increasing incidents of mob lynching against communities, as few instances needing attention of public conscience. Looking at the ideals of constitution, Martha Nussbaum, one of the contemporary political scientist, philosopher, argues that there needs to be a mass movement of non-violent protests, and it needs to join Hindus and minorities in firm demand that this sort of thing must stop. Only if majority expresses the will to defend minority rights will minorities be of the minority rights will be able to be protected, and they will feel confident. At the end of the address, Ambedkar cited the relatively successful democracies like US, UK, France, and those failed like Egypt, Syria, which started with democracy but ended with autocracies. Now, when we look at the prospects of democracy, actually, Ambedkar was very critical that how democracy will be successful given the kind of social structures that we have. And in these conditions, actually, he was saying that even in the initial years of his engagement, where he was not the cabinet minister after 1951, he has been engaging in the constitution, in the parliament, and therein he has been time and again arguing that the way the Indian democracy was functioning during those times, I'm talking about the early 1950s, he said that there are very less chances that there will be a kind of success of the democracy. Why? Because the kind of democracy, for the functioning of the democracy, the kind of conditions which are important, actually, we are not trying to develop those conditions in the country. And that's where he was very actually having despair. He was despair, in fact. He was saying that the success of democracy may not be there in Indian conditions. And if you see the last 70 years or so, procedurally, one can say that we have been a successful democracy. But in a substantive sense, whether the democracy has succeeded or not, that still one can question. I think I'll stop here, and your questions are invited. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Navin, for putting several insights on the functioning of democracy and Ambedkar perspective, in the light of Ambedkar's perspective. Now the session is open for discussion. Very brief, few questions, direct short questions, and we'll continue the valedictory session soon after this. A valedictory session is going to be just for half an hour. Our chief guest, Professor Limbadri, chairperson, chairman, the State Council of Higher Education, is going to join very soon online. He took time in between these meetings. And yeah, questions, please. Discussion.
We are already there.
Namaste, sir. Sir, namaste. Namaste, sir. I'll just 5 minutes. 5 minutes, sir.
No issue. Carry on, please.
Okay. Professor Sripati Ramadu will wind up the discussion, and then we'll take questions just for 5 minutes.
Good evening, friends. First of all, I would like to thank Professor Sudharani Garu for giving me this opportunity. 2 papers have been presented in the afternoon session. And two presenters are happy to be my friends personally. When I was in Jamia Millia Islamia in Delhi, we used to interact frequently. And I'm very happy to be here to share some of the thoughts over their paper with only 5 minutes as the chairperson has ordered. The first thing, yeah. The first paper was reflecting on the cultural nationalism. Actually, organizing this seminar at this critical juncture is quite a difficult kind of a thing, because the two issues, democracy and nationalism, are always at tension. And today it is more critical, and both are unable to get along, coexist. And always whenever there is a democratic question rises, there will be a cultural nationalism coming forward to crush it. And here, my friend Aloni has come out with the ideas of Ambedkar as to what was nationalism as for Ambedkar. And a very interesting point he brought in front of us was that, as for Ambedkar, the Ambedkar defines nationalism as a corporate sentiment of oneness, a brotherhood, a kind of brotherhood, kith and kin. And that kind of a nationalism is being totally tarnished, and a different kind of nationalism has been brought forth, as in the morning session, Professor Gajendran has rightly brought in front of us. All the cock and bull stories have been brought forth, and he has rightly presented as to how we can overcome the global warming by pouring water on the globe. That way, all the kind of as morning I was referring to this post-truth issues, and all the cock and bull stories have been tried into realities. They are trying to project them as realities. That is by constructing myths, by constructing a kind of lies. They are trying to construct nationalism, which is against the nationalism visualized by Dr. Ambedkar. This is, as far as Aloni's paper was quite clearly understood, but I wanted to reflect more, but time is restricting me. The second paper is again an interesting paper, which is about democracy. In fact, when Ambedkar was writing the Constitution of India, there were two important issues in front of him. One was that there was no nationality as such. There was no feeling of brotherhood or a unity or integrity, whatever we call. That is one side. The other side, there were lots of diversities. Ambedkar needs to address both these issues. And he took the Constitution writing as a level playing field. And he provided opportunities to everyone, all the sections of people who are deprived of their rights. If anyone defines Constitution in one single word, I always define it in a sense that it is an antidote to the Manusmriti. Whatever is denied by Manusmriti, that have been accommodated into the Constitution of India. That is how the Constitution came into existence as a level playing field, and also accommodating the democratic values which Narendra has narrated just now. And as we all know, that the main conditions of Ambedkar, all of them are in crisis today. The first condition was absence of inequalities, but today inequalities are consciously nurtured and promoted. That is known. And second point was opposition. And today, actually, Ambedkar wanted opposition in parliament and legislative bodies to be there, as well as in the society. But today, opposition is branded as anti-national and something which is undemocratic, which is against the development of the nation. Of course, tyranny of the majority is another important thing. Actually, whatever Ambedkar has visualized that day, that this majority kind of nationalism would be a threat for the nation we are experiencing today. The kind of narrations they gave, you see, they always talk about majority's view should be accepted, but the majoritarian view of the Mahabharata, where all the Kauravas were also majority. The Kauravas' majority was denied as wrong, but the majority here is approved, and they wanted to have this majority to prevail over the other groups of people. And constitutional morality, there is no question of constitutional morality. They wanted to totally withdraw the constitution. And also we know that recently they have appointed a committee of 25 members to write a Hindu Samvidhan. And where is the question of constitutional morality today? And these are all very painful things. And with all these things, given the time constraint, Madam is waiting. Anyway, thank you so much. And when I get time again, I would like to reflect on them in detail. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ramdu, for sorry, forced to stop you, but yeah, the session is open for discussion. Oh, yeah, Dr. Rajkumar. Yeah, please come here. It's getting recorded.
Professor Alone Saab, this question is for you. The Greek and Roman cultures have been amazing cultures over the years, but you have meant to say that these myths and legends never made their appearance into a definition of their nationalism, either current day Greece or current day Italy. But would you not legitimately say that spirituality is considered to be an element beyond rationality? And you always looked at this as spirituality as protected ignorance. That's the word I've been seeing there. Is there no narrative that we can have with rationalism for a spirituality to exist, which can give a way for India to have a narrative like this? Or you think that the Greek and Roman models are probably the most rational ones to take? So I did realize that you posted something about very rational practice there, which is very ridiculous. But apart from that, do you think that is being overplayed, the spirituality role in Indian definition of nationalism? That's one question for you, sir. For Narendra Saab, I just wanted to say that you gave a very depressing tone of Dr. Ambedkar's view that all these have not been fulfilled at all. The kind of democracy we have, the public conscience aspect, the moral order, the constitutional morality, if all have been decimated in the way over the years, even in the 50s, what is the solution way forward? Is there something that Dr. Ambedkar gave as a solution to this rather than just a critique? So just wanted these two questions, sir.
Thank you. He'll put together and then answer.
Yes, I think that is better. I'm student of history. Even after retirement, I learned so much of history after my retirement. So therefore, I call myself student of history. And history, student of history has to define a nation. If others define a nation, that might look partial. So student of history will have a notion of a totality. In a total perspective only, historian will comment. In this background, I want to point out one or two points to Professor Alone. I want to learn from him. It's a new view he has given. For instance, recalling rivers, forts, rajas, etc. is not a nation. Do you go to temple? Do you go to fort? See Indian nation? No, you will see India, country. It is not, nation is not there. Nation, absolutely, idea, imagination and idea. It is not yet fulfilled. Indians did not become a nation at nation in the making. We are, yes, nation in the making. This is what we have to notice it. And one people, nation means one people. Ambedkar also tells this. One people means across the castes and regions. Morning, I think Rajshekar, he has given Ambedkar idea of territorial nation, not a social nation. Territorial nation, there is a difference here.
Territorial nation failed. And social nation also failed. Territorial nation failed because territory divided. Social nation, they thought they constitute a nation, social nation. It became impossible to Nehru to constitute a nation. Therefore, Nehru depended upon caste. If there is no caste, there will not be mobilization in this country. Caste is mobilizing factor. Nehru wantedly third general election included Shudras into the governance, into the elections. So Narendra, question is, I am questioning the concept of nation you have used. So Narendra, I am saying that success of democracy, you said, not success of democracy, electoral politics. Success of electoral politics were successfully conducted, except once during Indira Gandhi time. Successfully, we are obeying 5 years term. After 5 years time, we are going to elections and conducting it. But the democracy did not make so far itself India into nation. The democracy objective is to make India a nation. That is a failure. So this is what actually two comments I thought I'll make.
Thank you. They are not questions, only comments, so need not be taken. Please, professors. Aloni, yeah. आप आ जाइए इधर आके हाँ आ जाइए ना please. We don't have time.
Well, I shall be as brief as possible. The first question which Rajkumar has raised, and that too with regarding to the his query of my positioning vis-a-vis that of what he cited as a Greek and Roman example. Well, frankly speaking, in no way I hinted about Greek or Roman nationalism or anything, or their histories, or the kind of a myth that have been used in their tradition. Every tradition has a myth and everybody has used myths. But what is important is, can we use myth to build a modern nation? And on that count, we have to question our own modernities. That is very pertinent. The second thing is that about spirituality. The spirituality, how you define spirituality. If your spirituality is not empowering you to observe or practice equality, then that spirituality has no meaning. If your spirituality is not empowering you to raise your voice against the discrimination, against the suppression of the women and other state of the society, and whatever ills that are being practiced in the society, then I don't think that spirituality will ever empower you to become a nation, a good nation, a livable nation, a lovable nation, and a pride nation. The third and the far most important thing is that when we talk about Plato, Aristotle, and all those people, see chronologically where do they belong, and do we have a very strong philosophical traditions in India? Yes, we do have. It is very, very important to understand the Indian philosophical traditions, and one has to see like who are the people, who is a persona who can be pitted against your Plato. Plato, Aristotle, see the Aristotle's views on women. See Plato's views on republic. Are they really democratic and are they really empowering? And see the views of people, society, and democracy, equality, as has been propounded by Buddha. And not only that, the Buddhist text Digha Nikaya talks about the 18 schools of philosophical traditions that have been very different, which were abrahmanic, which were non-Brahmanic practices. So there are a number of things. Then the last is the second these things is all about defining history. I mean, defining the nation, I have not gone into the definition of what people have defined. I'm not interested in that, what people have defined. What is important for me is to analyze the phenomenon, and then how you understand that phenomenon. And can there be a critical understanding of phenomenon, and can your critique produce an enabling process? And that enabling process is all about changing your mind consciousness and perception. Is our writing history has changed that perception? Could we come out of that Brahmanical cultural nationalism which is being practiced and which is being imposed on each and every citizen of Republic of Government of India? The citizen of Republic of Government of India has absolutely no way to understand what is mythic and what is historic. So this is a great impositions of the knowledge production process and the practices that are being done, and that is systematically being imposed by the discipline of history, by making history as a myth and narrating everything as a myth, like, and taking a nation, talking about nation as a great nation, saying that, oh, we had even plastic surgery, and example of Ganesha and all the test, the fertility by other means and all those things. So these are impractical things. The impractical things will not make nation a strong nation, a good nation. And the last thing is that the caste is a mobilizing factor. Yes, it is true. Caste is a mobilizing factor. No doubt about that. That is being practiced in India, and who is responsible for that, and who is getting benefited by that. Anarchy is being practiced, anarchy is being analyzed in Indian social context, but who is benefiting anarchy and who is practicing anarchy and who is maintaining anarchy? That is not being addressed neither by the post-colonialists, neither by any philosopher in India, and nor by even a historian in India. These are the problems which the so-called intellectuals of this nation are practicing and facing, and they are very dubious in their all imaginations and character and interrogation, and therefore we have to dismantle these kind of practices. And politics in India for me is Ambedkar, anti-Ambedkar. I'm not talking about the political parties. For me, it is Ambedkar for transformation, anti-Ambedkar, not against that is for status quo and not for transformation. So you have to understand how the politics is being made and who are responsible for taking caste as a mobilizing factor in colonial India and also in the post-colonial India, and who are the ones who have been opposing to those kind of factors. That also historical analysis needs to be addressed, needs to be made very clearly to our own next generation and to our own generation. Thank you very much.
The only question was regarding the solutions. See, solutions are within the challenges. If you meet those challenges, then that means we are going towards the solutions. That's what I would say. Thank you.
Yeah. We'll end this session, and the felicitation will take place in the valedictory for both the resource persons, along with the valedictory addressee, Professor Dasan. So thank you, the resource persons, for being with us. And yeah, we'll continue. We'll continue the valedictory now. I request Venu to conduct the proceedings. First,
Thank you very much, Professor Sudharani Madam. Good afternoon once again, one and all. All the invitees and guests for one-day international seminar valedictory is being organized by Faculty of Social Sciences, Department of History, Dr. B.R. Ambedkar Open University, on Ambedkar, Democracy and Nationalism. We welcome you all once again, and it is my proud privilege to welcome all our guests and invitees for today's seminar. May I now request today's chief guest, Professor Limbadri Garu, Chairman, Telangana State Council of Higher Education, is going to be joined through online. We welcome you, sir, once again. Also, I invite today's keynote speaker for valedictory session, Professor M. Dalton, former Dean, Central University of Kerala, and former Registrar, University of Calicut. I welcome you, sir. Please kindly come on into the dais and occupy the chair. Professor Dasan ji. Also, I request the president of today's conference, Professor Sudharani Garu, Director Academic and Seminar Director, B.R. Ambedkar Open University, kindly come on to the stage and occupy the chair, madam. It's my honor to once again welcome our beloved Registrar, Dr. A.B.N. Reddy Garu, today's guest of honor. Kindly come on to the stage, sir. And also, I welcome today's conference co-director, Professor Vaddanam Srinivas Garu. Please come on to the stage. I request to Sarita Garu kindly present a bouquet to our today's chief guest, Sri Dasan Garu. Immediately, I request to Professor Sudharani Garu, Director Academic and today's president of the function, kindly conduct the further proceedings, madam.
Srinivas, sir, join here. Respected Chief Guest of today's event, Professor R. Limbadri, Chairperson, Telangana State Council of Higher Education, and our esteemed guest of and valedictory addressing, Professor Manuel Dalton from Kannur and Calicut universities. He served both the universities, and a learned person. He headed the Indo-Canadian Studies and professor in English also. And our colleagues will introduce her when he's going to deliver the address. And before me giving any presentation of the valedictory, I request our chief guest, Professor R. Limbadri Garu, to give his message, because sir squeezed his time in between two important sessions, took the time off from secretary. And very kind of you, sir, just to give us the strength and encouragement to wind up this session. And I'm very highly indebted to our university as well as our Department of History to you, sir. Professor I invite Professor R. Limbadri Garu to give his valuable message on this valedictory session. Thank you.
Thank you, madam. Professor Sitaram Rao Garu, Vice Chancellor Dr. B.R. Ambedkar Open University, Professor A.V.N. Reddy, Registrar of the University, Professor Sudharani, Seminar Director, Professor M. Dasan, a former Dean and great historian, and today's chief guest, and he is going to deliver the valedictory address. And Professor Srinivas, co-director, and Vedgopal Reddy, public relation officer, and all the distinguished colleagues, dignitaries on the dais, off the dais, and online participants. First, I congratulate Professor Sudharani and her team for taking great initiative in conducting the international seminar on Ambedkar, Democracy and Nationalism. It is the need of the hour, particularly in the academic discourse. It is very, very essential to take initiative, conduct this type of seminars on democracy and nationalism. From the morning till this time, you may have the distinguished persons' lectures, deliberated and different dimensions about the Ambedkar perspective on democracy and nationalism. We have the different understanding about the democracy. The term democracy is a very popular one. The concept of democracy is, however, a very complex one. It has no universal definition as such. But as a student of social science, we are all aware that the democracy means what we understood in our academic discourse is a government in which the will of the majority of qualified citizens rules. Or democracy is basically as a form of government. But whereas Dr. Ambedkar has developed a very holistic perspective of having democracy. The democracy is liberty, equality, and fraternity, which is not representing the real spirit of democracy in the governments. Because even though they may be having the democratic government, they may not be taking the spirit of democracy in involving the people's aspirations in their ruling. We are all aware that the democracy purpose is to provide the participation of people in decision making. It is for the people, by the people, to the people. So many definitions have. Still we have looking the resources are privatized. It is not access to the people. The knowledge is privatized. The privatization of knowledge is a big debate in the contemporary society. And privatization of resources, excluding the people in the participation of various forums. So the Baba Saheb Ambedkar, the entire debate is, the basic thing is, through democracy, we have to achieve the equality. Equality is the basic principle for the democracy's concern. The social living is the basic principle for the democracy is concerned, where how the social structure are existing in the society, how they are living together, respecting together, having a very fraternity and cordial relations with each other. That is the basic aspects required for the democracy. So we are in the graded inequality society. Baba Saheb Ambedkar want a guaranteed equality society. Everybody should be treated equally in all respects, sharing of resources, sharing of knowledge, access of every aspects, so many other things. I don't want to take your much of time because we have a very distinguished scholar like Dr. Dalton, who would like to deliver the valedictory address on this important occasion. I once again congratulate Dr. Sudharani and university authorities for taking initiative in conducting the important seminar on important topic, that is democracy and nationalism. With regard to the Dr. Ambedkar views, I thank the organizers for giving me this opportunity. I also thank the authorities for that. Sorry, Sudharani and Vasu, for I am unable to come physically and share the dais with you due to my urgent meetings with the government officers. Thank you, one and all.
Meetings which is going on, and thank you so much for encouraging us with your kind words and being a constant support to the Ambedkar Open University. You've been associated with 40 decades of Ambedkar Open University's existence in various capacities as co-writer, editor, and resource person, and mentor of public administration department, and to us also. Thank you so much for your presence and inspiring words. A registrar also is hard pressed up with the time. But before he takes off for his valuable address, and we need his presence also, even Reddy Garu, just bear with us for 10 more minutes, where our participants would like to take certificates from you, and Professor Dasan also. I'll just be brief in my valedictory address also, because it's clubbed into one, presidential as well as valedictory. This session you're all witnessing is I never expected when we thought about the seminar, and the nature also could not cooperate with us, heavy rains and whatnot, and so many hurdles in between, but we could overcome all those things, and it's weather supported us, and you all, your presence made us this very great one, this one-day international seminar entitled Ambedkar Democracy Nationalism. The theme itself dragged all of you here, because this is the need of the hour. Everyone is saying since morning to talk about Babasaheb Ambedkar, to revisit him in the context of the present day political developments which is happening in India. And this event started with the welcome address by PRO Venugopal Reddy, followed by the presidential address, Professor K. Sitaram Rao Garu, who explained the importance and theme of the seminar, as well as the relevance of Babasaheb Ambedkar's perspective to the present day context. And in his address, I have talked about the theme, and Vadanam Srinivas, head Department of History, he introduced the guests, and the chief guest of the seminar, Dr. Rajshekhar Undru, gave a tremendous, very spectacular speech with several observations which are very unique in its nature, because he had shelled out the pages of archives and presented the theme in his address as a different aspect of Babasaheb Ambedkar, that who is a maker of the, who was behind the concept of integration of Indian states into Indian Union. So being very hardly we talk about him as a nationalist, the media and other writings. But his contribution right from 1930s, he brought out, and how he was behind the integration process, as well as the Hyderabad state integration, as well as the VC added that he is behind this concept of the states. The Telangana state also took the inspiration from Ambedkar's contribution. So in his keynote address, Professor Lakshman D. Satya, Lock Haven University, Pennsylvania, who joined virtually, spoke about Ambedkar's views on nationalism, and he says basically a sentiment. Nationalism is a sentiment, as said by Ambedkar, who visualized a composite civilization for in India. Composite civilization for India. So in the session one, Dr. Gajendra Nayaturi from Göttingen University, Germany, he is a historian and an anthropologist, and delivered again lecture virtually and debated on the topic de-Brahmanization, casteless identity and democratic society, notes on Ambedkar philosophy of feminism, and several new concepts he talked about, the Brahmanical Shialism, and which he means that knowledge pretensions that has led to misleading and strategies segregation of Indian society. He stated that his sort of this segregation is perpetuated by the civil society, academic institutions, and societal practices. And he also urged the audience and the learned gathering to shed away these age-old practices of which the demarcation, discrimination practices in India. And Gajendra urged that all sorts of this Shialism needs to be rejected and discarded. So a brief discussion followed, very vibrant discussion by Dr. Rajkumar Sunga and Ravi and several others. And this post-lunch session by Salone, in his session interrogating the mythic and cultural nationalism, expressed that critical framework of protected ignorance. This is again the term coined by Yashodatta Alone, protected ignorance, and is to interrogate the knowledge, because he didn't have the time much to elaborate it upon, but the knowledge production process, the mythic and ideas of sacred and divine, which in quotes are part of the protected ignorance. He says that this is being practiced, this is being taught in academia, as well as to the children of this. To a song, he showed that how nation is construed through the unilateral projection of the hegemonic practices. And another resource person, Narendra Kumar, discussed understanding of conditions for success and prospects of democracy in Ambedkar and contemporary times. And he discussed the thoughts of Ambedkar on democracy, elaborating on presented as instances from the various books on Ambedkar. So through the writings of Ambedkar, he portrayed how Ambedkar perceived a democracy and what is his vision of the inclusive nationalism. So this is precisely what we had listened to the, and this is also a session followed by the, again, discussion by Professor Tirumali and Dr. Rajkumar. And very pertinent questions raised in this, because Ambedkar says that, we can't see anything in totality, like, we need to look at it in totality, but no thing can be seen as a separate one, because Indian conditions are so conditioned, Indian situation is so conditioned by the practices, age-old practices and belief system, which cannot be removed at once. We need to find a solution. As Narendra very pertinently said, that, very aptly said, the solutions lies in the challenges. That's what we need to look out into this. And with this report evaluation, I invite our guest of honor, Dr. A.B.R. Reddy, Registrar, Ambedkar Open University, to give his message.
Thank you, ma'am. So good afternoon, everybody. Respected President of this function, Professor Tyranny, ma'am, Director Academic and Seminar Director. Today, Chief Guest of the valedictory function, and Professor Limbadri Garu, Chairman, State Council of Higher Education. Today's special guest for valedictory address, Professor Dalton, Professor Srinivas Vaddanam, Co-Director and Head Department of History, and dignitaries of the dais, colleagues, non-teaching staff, invitees, and others. First, at outset, I congratulate the Department of History and appreciating to organize the international conference, the short notice, and also organize it in a very fantastic way and identify the best speakers available and right theme and sub-themes. So in the short notice, nearly 154 participants, 94 offline, 60 online participants participated, and almost it's a great success to the Department of History. I think so that this short notice, when even the terrains and the atmosphere also not conducive, supported to conducting this, organizing this seminar. You know, all the hurdles have been overcome by the team of the department along with other faculty members of social science and university staff. So it's a great achievement. The second one, the speakers identified, the identification of speaker is more crucial and important because the relevant theme and the right persons is the most important to the any success of the seminar. So it's rightly they appreciate the Professor ma'am to identify such a persons, and almost all the participants have been enjoyed the lectures delivered by the various speakers. So due to the various schedules, I was not able to follow the total program, ma'am. Between this, in well, little bit I almost all observed it only. You know, almost all is relevant and the contextual, the present scenario. So I have the total proceedings have to be published in a book form that is most useful to you. All the scholars as well as the who require particularly getting some benefit from these proceedings. Anyhow, I once again congratulate to the team and appreciate for their efforts. Thank you for giving this opportunity. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, A.V.N. Reddy Garu. Dr. A.V.N. Reddy has been a constant support in terms of the file is not stopped, not even a half an hour. So soon after I sent the file, he okayed it, and that was very kind of him and nice of him to just, without finances, we can't do anything, and without manpower also, we can't do anything. I have a tremendous and spectacular, very supporting team, organizing team, a big hand to the organizing team. All my colleagues in the Faculty of Social Sciences and Faculty of Education, they just, with me throughout the day and night, supporting me in my this thing, and I'll take their names also later. But right now, we are eagerly waiting to listen to Professor Manuel Dalton, the former Dean and Central University of Kerala, former Registrar, University of Calicut, and a learned professor in English department. Thank you, sir, please.
Yeah, very good afternoon. Sorry, it's very late, so I'll be very brief. Don't worry about it.
Just our colleague will introduce.
No, it's okay. I mean, introduce former professor. That's enough. No, I'll introduce myself. Don't worry.
Please, sir, 1 second. Let us start this. Professor Manuel Dalton is currently the professor and head of Department of English and Comparative Literature, Central University of Kerala. Formerly, he was holding various academic and administrative positions: professor, head, dean, registrar in Calicut and Kannur universities for about 3 decades. He has published about 40 research articles in prestigious journals and books on a variety of topics like culture, land rights, human rights, environment, Australian Aboriginal, the First Nation theories being the pet topic of Sir, Canadians, First Nations, tribal, Dalit writings, and presented papers in international seminars in countries like USA, UK and Canada, Australia, China, Cuba, South Africa, Singapore, Malaysia, Thailand. I missed out a few countries also. And he has authored edited 9 books, including Oxford, India, Anthology of Malayalam Dalit Writing, 2012, and Countercultural Discourse and Dalit Literature in 2014, and he was awarded Shastri Indo-Canadian Fellowship from UGC Doctoral Research Award. So how could I miss all these things?
Count me as a student of history because I'm a graduate in history and economics. Then I moved on to literature, not because I love literature, but I couldn't afford to study politics or economics, for which I got admission, but it was far away. I was a poor man, poor boy in those days. Then I took an MBA, then I'm learning a lot of literatures. I'm a jack of all trade, but master of none. But I'm an Ambedkarist and a practicing Buddhist and environmentalist. The topic I've chosen is inclusive nationalism, because from the talks that we have already been listening to, we understood that ours has not been an inclusive society, not to speak of inclusive democracy or inclusive nationalism. So maybe all of us will work together to make our society inclusive. Inclusiveness is a catchword in the contemporary debates and discourses on economic development. It starts with the 11th five-year plan, where at least our national leaders thought of making our country inclusive, which is to accept the fact that we have never been inclusive, so we've been exclusive. The RBI also spoke about making the economic growth inclusive. Even now, people started speaking about it. It means they can go on speaking for another 100 years. Okay. Dr. B.R. Ambedkar's vision was to build a democratic and inclusive India. People have defined nationalism in different ways. I'm more familiar with people like, as Sudha was mentioning, Australian Aboriginal people, North American people, because I lived with them for a couple of months, and they said, "No, we are a nation within a nation." So before Canada as a nation was being made, they were saying we were existing as a nation. We had all the characteristics of a nation. We have a territory, we have a common language, we have a shared culture, we have a region. So is with Australian Aboriginals. So is our tribal people. Now, I'm sure you're aware that in so many tribal people in our own country has unified themselves and saying we are neither Christians nor Hindus. So let the Constitution give us a separate category. So that is where we speak of our narratives. Democratic or democracy is a narrative. Nationalism is a narrative. But we are thinking in terms of making counter narratives. At least academically, we can do that. So but social activists are trying to make it a reality. Let us be hand in hand with. Ambedkar didn't conceive his idea of nationalism, as you all know, just from his studies. He has his own experience as well. His studies, his research, his learning, his own great teachers and philosophers, plus the fact that he has lived as an untouchable in India. So it is from these things that he conceived his idea. And people say that he learned these ideas of liberty, equality, and fraternity from French Revolution, but he said, no, I have learned it from my great master, Buddha, who said, as the former speaker has already said, the ideas of Maitri, the ideas of Karuna, if you don't have that, what is democracy? Democracy is just that, it's humanity. I mean, Ambedkar's definition of spirituality is not the kind of metaphysical spirituality that our Rishis Baba was speaking. He was showing the slides, no? He was not metaphysical at all. His spirituality is the kind of feeling oneness, brotherhood or sisterhood with anybody regardless of his creed or caste or gender. That is the kind of spiritual definition that is, which can only be attained if there is fraternity. As we have already been listening to, people, distinguished professors telling us, neither the Russian model, which prioritized equality, nor the other model which prioritized liberty, but fraternity. Without fraternity, what is the point in liberty? So I'll be very brief because the keynote address has already gave us the background how Ambedkar has been continuously, relentlessly striving at deriving a kind of nationalism throughout his interventions since 1990s or 1960s, early in the century, up to 1940s, when he was forced to make a large 400-page report on what will happen and what could be the solution if at all India is to be divided. He was forced because his own association Labour Party entrusted him, come on, study on it, make a research. And later on they decided, come on, publish it, because it is. And he is saying, I'm not for partition, neither for against it. But if it is going to be a reality, what is a nation? So that's why, especially in this second chapter, goes on addressing the idea of nation and nationality. It is in this prologue to the book, Pakistan or Partition of India, he writes about the origin of the treaties, which I'm skipping because for want of time. It is in the second chapter, A Nation Calling Home, as he explains his notion of a nation, nationalism, and his attitude towards Indian national movement. B.R. Ambedkar's notion of nationalism and his understanding of the Indian national movement have rarely received, I repeat the word, have rarely received adequate academic consideration, either from the liberal or radical scholars and the historians of India. He was often misunderstood, criticized as anti-national, stooge of the British, opportunist, imperialist, quote unquote. I think the raison d'etre of this seminar is to revisit Ambedkar's idea of democracy and nationalism, which is the result of his scholarship, his lived experience and observation for almost 5 decades, because he was born, as we know, in 1891, and it is in 49th and 50th age that he wrote this treatise. So for a person like me, who has lived the life of an untouchable in this country for 70 years, still young, as a student of history and economics, I can hardly discuss Ambedkar's ideas on democracy and nationalism without relating to the multiple narratives on these concepts. But I'm skipping because I've read and taught Ambedkar, Pata Chatterjee, and all these people who theorized the idea of nation. And I'll be very brief because we don't have enough time to. But I'm afraid I may not have time to expatiate upon them. To Ambedkar, freedom of a country cannot be distinguished from freedom of its people. This is often he repeatedly saying, freedom is not for the legislators or for the ministers or for leading communities. It is for the people. It's people-centric democratic nation that he imagined or envisioned. Freedom of its people, and hence he emphasized the freedom of people, especially those who are pushed to the margins and discriminated. Yesterday, I was listening to the TV, former RBI governor was speaking. If discrimination still exists in a country, we are immoral, very simply terms. We have been speaking about constitutional morality. It's a country we have been 75 years. We have been claiming democratic, but still discrimination of all sorts of gender, creed, language, region, barriers go on existing. Then why do we have the right to speak about morality? Especially when Ambedkar was influenced by the idea of moralities and Shilas, which Gautam Buddha talked about. So whereas the nationalist leadership in general, and the Hindu nationalists in particular, laid emphasis on the political freedom, ignoring the social aspects of nationalism, Ambedkar argued that in the absence of complete freedom of the people, nationalism becomes a conduit of internal slavery, organized tyranny for the poor and the depressed classes. He viewed nationalism as a spiritual phenomenon rooted in humanism, because he was of the opinion that nationalism should be based on a strong will to live as a nation and a deep feeling to make a state a cultural home. According to him, political unity alone will hardly bring about such a kind of nationalism. Rather, social unity would be more congenial for bringing about a sense of human brotherhood, which induces a sense of oneness. In order to bring about a sense of human brotherhood, Baba Sahib laid stress on the spiritual unity of the people. He was convinced that unless and until the Indian people secure political power, and unless the power was concentrated in the hands of a socially suppressed section of the society, it would not be possible to completely eradicate all social, cultural disabilities, which has been suffering for years. He wanted to ensure equality and civil rights for those who for centuries were deprived of them. Indian society in view of Ambedkar was a system which gave no scope for the growth of sentiment of equality, because it has never been discussed in the Shastras or Smritis or whatever. It has never been the concept in our pre-Vedic or Vedic discourses or even the Brahmanic discourses. So he had to fight at two levels. He argued for freedom for the people from social evils, inequality and untouchability, and fought for freedom from external force as well as from internal oppression. At the same time, for colonial rule and also from the Brahminic internal rule, which is more worse than colonialist. Among the multiple narratives in vogue during the pre-independence period, we have primarily three. The Congress-led narrative of freedom of India was dominant. Parallel to this was the narrative of RSS or Hindu Mahasabha, whatever you call it, which argued for the reconstruction of the quote-unquote glorious tradition of India, which of course he has exposed, colonies exposed, strengthening the social cultural institutions and arousing national consciences. Ambedkar's narrative talked about freedom of India from social inequality and untouchability to uplift the downtrodden and marginalized that did not have any participation in the public life of colonial India. Looking from this perspective, Ambedkar's self-generated idea of nationalism and the social structure and political system of a country could be seen as subaltern narrative of nationalism. I'm aware of the limitations of using subaltern because I have studied and taught the whole history of groups of subaltern group of historians because they don't consider caste. Until recently, of course, one or two of them have started addressing, revisiting Ambedkar's notion of democracy and nationalism. That's just all the distinguished speakers have been doing that because it was written in 40. And why do we discuss it again? It is because we have to revisit and reconstruct or deconstruct whatever, and to address the lacunas in the whole discourse on democracy and nationalism, and to make it at least ourselves aware, at least the younger generation of scholars and students aware that how the discourse on democracy have been unilinear, and we have not been really addressing the core issues. So it's well known that nationalist leadership in general and the Hindu nationalists in particular laid excessive emphasis on political freedom, ignoring social aspects of nationalism. One of the weaknesses of national movement, according to Ambedkar, was that it did not have an effective program to ensure the inclusion of the repressed and the socially excluded into the notion. He was not criticizing just for criticizing. The fact that it has no program to make it inclusive, that's why he was just fighting against it. Though nationality and nationalism are two different psychological states of human mind, there cannot be nationalism without the feeling of nationality. Somebody has already mentioned, former speaker, so I'm skipping that. Let me quote a very relevant quotation from him, which is what we are doing now in the present context, about eulogizing the national leadership, eulogizing the dominant culture. Ambedkar said, for India, Bhakti, or what may be called the path of devotion or hero worship, plays a part in its politics. That's what we are doing. Everybody is praising everybody else. Unequaled in magnitude by part it plays in the politics of any other country in the world. No other country, this politics of praising or glorifying exists as in our country. Bhakti in religion, says Ambedkar, may be a road to salvation of the soul. But in politics, Bhakti or hero worship is a sure road to degradation and eventual dictatorship. I'm afraid this prediction of Ambedkar might be true in our country if it continues like this. He explains two reasons why the Hindu have never yielded on the point, even to Rabindranath Tagore. Firstly, I'll be very brief. Firstly, the Hindu felt ashamed to admit that India was not a nation. He was speaking about, of course, in the period of 1930 up to 1939, because it's written in 1940. Secondly, the Hindu had realized that nationality had a most intimate connection with the aim of self-government, because we were fighting for self-government. He knew that by the end of the 19th century, it had become an accepted principle that the people who constitute a nation were initiated on that account to self-government, and that any patriot who asked for self-government for his people had to prove that they were a nation. That is the relationship. So they have no other way. The Hindu, for these reasons, never stopped to examine whether India was or was not a nation. In fact, the Hindus never cared to reason whether nationality was merely a question of calling a people a nation or was a question of people being a nation. This is a very significant quotation from Ambedkar. Calling a people a nation and being a nation. He knew one thing, namely, that if he was to succeed in his demand for self-government of India, he must maintain, if he could not prove it, that India was a nation. Ambedkar quotes Renan, I am skipping something. Now, the sectarian approach to nationalism is reflected in the words of Nehru's own words, the Discovery of India, which a former speaker has already referred. So let me skip that also. Now, let me conclude. I would like to address or call Ambedkar's idea of nationalism as not only inclusive nationalism, it's a kind of alternative nationalism, or another term I would use, try to use, historians may correct me, it's a kind of subaltern nationalism. Ambedkar liked the question of caste with democracy, Ambedkar linked the question of caste with democracy and nationalism. To prioritize the society over polity, and linking them was unprecedented in India. That is also very important. So the argument was, Ambedkar was trying to look at from a perspective because of his knowledge, education, and also experience. And nobody has linked these ideas of liberty or equity or fraternity with the whole discourse on European democracy. So it was his own self-generated ideas born, and that's how, unfortunately, these ideas have not been acknowledged by the Indian national leaders. So that is one of the reasons why probably still we are going on discussing peripherally about this democracy nationalism, but we are long miles to go before. Let me conclude by saying that Ambedkar's vision of democracy and nationalism aimed to serve the interest of all the people and the welfare of all the people. Something which Lord Buddha was saying, Bahujana Hidaya and Bahujana Sukhaya. The essence of the teachings of his own master from which he learned and imbibed the ideas of democracy, the ideas of equality, fraternity, karuna. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor Das. And I know you can talk for hours together, and he's what an energy set, like a 70-year-old, young Professor Das, and whom I know for 40 years. Tremendous energy. That's we need to inculcate all the research scholars who are here. He's you know, one thing very cutest part of it, he learned Pali. He passed the Pali language. Just now, he received 2 days back the distinction, with distinction. So from Pune University. So that is his, he still calls himself a student. That's fantastic. Thank you so much, sir, for traveling all around from Kerala. Pleasure meeting you and having you here in this valedictory session. And now felicitations to the esteemed guests. Huh? Yeah, before felicitation, we'll ask our esteemed guests on the dais, registrar and the valedictory addresser, to issue certificates to our participants. Present certificates. Jai Prakash, our research scholar. Kishan, Jyotibai, please, all of you come here. First, I call upon Jai Prakash. And yeah, both of you, sir, please.
Jai Prakash.
Yeah. College,
degree college, lecturer and degree college,
government degree college, Nalgonda.
And also
scholar, research scholar, Department of History. D. Kishan. D. Kishan. Yeah. No. Yeah, he's also from degree college.
He's also lecturer in degree.
Yeah. Jyoti Bhai, who is main very constant support to me. Recently joined, Dr. Martha Srinivas. Just a symbolic presentation. Only 10 of them going to receive from the dice. Rest of them will give it. All of you, please collect the certificates from the counter. Yeah, Raghavendra Reddy. Again, our research scholar. Potana. Research scholars from Usmania University. Register Potana, research scholar from Usmania University. Nazia Rahman, a research scholar. Next is Virubai. Nazia and then Virubai.
Last 10 years, CS has been held up for 10 years.
Praveen? K. Muslaya? Praveen Yalala is a research scholar. K. Muslaya, scholar from HCU. S. Kishore. I'm sorry, I'm not calling all the people here because want of time. It's raining outside, so I just want you to reach home safely after this. So, yeah, now the fill station. I call upon Narendra, please. I kept you waiting. Please come to the desk, and Ishida Daloni also. Please come to the desk. I request Dayakar, please come to the dais to fill stater.
What do you say to
Felicitation to our esteemed guest, Manuel Dasan, Professor Dasan, by our registrar and me also.
There is always a family can say no.
Yeah, no, Ishida Dalton. Formal vote of thanks by Manuel Department of History.
Respected dignitaries on the dais, of the dais, good evening to you all. It's my pleasant privilege to propose vote of thanks from my personal behalf and behalf of Department of History, Dr. B.R. Ambedkar Open University. At the outset, I thank our Honorable Vice Chancellor, Professor K. Sitaramaravu Garu, who is the constant inspiration for all of us and academic endeavors of our university. I thank our Chief Guest, Professor R. Limbatri Garu, for his valuable message. And also we are thankful to Professor M. Dasan Garu for delivering very insightful keynote address. Our thanks are due to our Registrar A.V.N. Reddy Garu for all his administrative support and messages. And I thank our resource persons of our sessions, Dr. Gajendran Ayathurai, Professor Yashodatta Aloni, Professor Narendra Kumar Garu, and also rapporteurs Dr. Pallavi Kapte, Dr. Lakshmi Garu, Dr. Rabindranath Salman for their thought-provoking presentations of resource persons and help of rapporteurs. And I thank our esteemed Dean, Faculty of Social Sciences, Professor Ganta Chakrapani Garu for his encouragement. I thank our Professor Sudharani Garu, Seminar Director, for making the seminar reality by making all arrangements. I thank all directors, Director EMMRC and Dr. Gunti Ravindra Garu, and in charge Computer Center, Dr. Vasantrao Garu, PRO, Dr. Venugopal Reddy Garu, Engineering Branch, and Graphics Design, Graphics Artist Venkat Swami Garu, and for their help and support to conducting this seminar. I thank our colleague in the department, Dr. G. Tayakar, for his continuous support. And also, I also extend acknowledge the valuable help by the organizing team for making this event a grand success. I thank invited guests and invitees, directors, deans, head of the departments, teaching faculty and non-teaching staff members, research scholars for their presence in the seminar. And I thank Dr. Rajkumar Garu, Professor I. Tirumali Garu, Ravi Kumar Rajapol Garu, Sripati Ramudu Garu, Adapa Satyan Sir, and other distinguished lecture persons like Ravi Babu Garu, Rushnad Rao Garu, and other persons. Thank you very much. Your presence is very much delighted for us. And I thank ITI Limited for sponsoring kits. And also I thank Prism Caterers for delicious lunch and IT. And I thank staff of Director Academic, Sarita, Jani, Jaya, and Narsireddy, Pentaya, Dayakar, and other organizing committee members, Lakshman, Giri. Sorry if I forgot anybody's name. Thank you very much. Thank you, one and all. And also, lastly, I thank the media and photographer Razu and EMRC team, Devakinandan and Divakar and other persons. Thank you very much, and thank you, one and all.
We request Rajkumar Songa to dais to receive the books.
Sir, Dr. Rajkumar Garu, please kindly comment.
These are from KK Raja, sir, to give it to you.
Take books.
See, this is what we want to in between. Yeah,
ask the questions.
And books and
but actually,
Yeah. Yeah, thank you so much. With this, we come to an end of the prolonged session. And I request all of you, please join for high tea, which has been provided in the dining place. We'll have tea because it's cold out there. Yeah, we thank Computer Center for necessary Zoom link, and Vasant and Yashwant, all the team for providing the link, and CSTD director providing this hall, and all the invitees who have been with us since morning, teaching, non-teaching faculty, and the organizing committee, Aruna and Uma, Sriveni, and Narsimmal, Inka, Avinash, and Sunil. I don't know how to name, several,
Research scholars from
Usmania, and Pallavi Kabde also. Throughout, she gave me a supporting, reporting of the sessions, and so many people like, I don't know, Lakshman, and I could see all of them. K. Dayakar is a constant supporter, like, all the competing, the sessions and all corrections, and he was very kind enough to put it along me. And thank you one and all. If I miss you, please excuse me. Some discomforts, this is all mine, my responsibility. But thank you a lot for making this. Yeah, please have tea and let's all be some. Thank you. Yeah. Tea is served, please.
Yeah, you missed it. What else was?